This is a compilation of 8 short horror stories written by different authors. They will be linked in the description of this video.
Couple's fortune. It was a Friday night during the hot and sticky month of July when we stopped at the little stand in our local mall. My then girlfriend Jeanette, high on chocolate truffles and life, was the one who spotted the sign advertising Couple's Fortunes. See if your relationship will stand the test of time. Despite my ardent protest, she insisted we have our fortune read. The fortune teller looked to be a man in his mid to late 50s, pot-bellied and sporting a long, greasy blonde ponytail. He didn't look very impressive to me, definitely not someone who would be able to provide such insights on our romantic future. He took a look at us, a couple of starry-eyed 19-year-old college students, then told us that we would have a happy relationship together for a time, but that we would ultimately never marry. He might as well have gut-punched Jeanette because she was so depressed the rest of that night. I tried to make her feel better, emphasizing that we would have a happy relationship and that guy was a quack who simply saw 2 young people and played the odds that they wouldn't stay together. She wasn't having any of it though. For her, our fate was sealed. Well, after a couple of weeks, Jeanette seemed to forget about the fortune and we got back into something like normalcy in our relationship. We started up our fall semester, then spring, and so on, until finally we graduated. Our career paths took us to different parts of the country, and we gradually fell out of touch. It seemed the fortune teller had gotten it right. Or maybe he hadn't. Just over a year ago, I spotted a mutual friend in the grocery store. Our conversation soon changed to Jeanette and our previous relationship. She told me that Jeanette was moving back into town and wondered if we would all want to get together. I was game, so we did. One thing led to another, and soon we were back together. Then, not only were we back together, but we were engaged. Eat that, fortune teller. The wedding planning was a whirlwind. Before we knew it, it was our wedding day. The weather was perfect, the birds were singing, and I was on cloud 9. Of course, I wasn't allowed to see Jeanette before the ceremony, so I spent the time with my groomsmen joking, laughing, and having a few drinks. That's when I saw him, though his ponytail was now completely gray and white. He looked a shriveled, sad version of his old self, with dark, sunken eyes and wrinkles the size of canyons. He was standing in the parking lot just outside the window where we were getting ready, staring in my direction with the most evil, gaping grin on his toothless face. Then, to my vomit-inducing horror, I saw he held something in his hand. Dangling by her long, luxurious black hair was my future wife's veiled and severed head.
Blue eyes. A new year has arrived, and with it shall come change. For too long now I have hated myself, loathed what I had become. So I made myself a New Year's resolution that I will make myself the person that I want to be. No more procrastinating. It is time for a better life. I met a beautiful woman named Sandy. We met at a nightclub, and straight away, something clicked. Something about her told me that she was the one. Her light blue eyes revealed her kindness just by gazing into them, and her smile warmed me inside. We arrived at my apartment at 3:26 a.m. We had some more drinks and spoke for a bit. Again, I found myself staring into her beautiful eyes, and I became lost in her gaze. Then a feeling overwhelmed me. the feeling of anticipation. I don't hear what she says, something about feeling lightheaded. I am much too focused on those icy blue eyes, those very desirable eyes. My focus soon shifted to the task at hand when her eyes finally closed. Those sedatives took longer than expected to kick in. I grabbed my good pair of scissors and went to town, trying to be as careful as possible as I snipped away her skin. I didn't want to kill the poor thing. When her entire skin was bundled up beneath my feet, I was left with one final task: the 2 icy blue gems inside her skull. I grabbed my trusty spoon and scooped one eyeball out into my hand. I suddenly felt Sandy starting to move again. I quickly scooped the other eye out just before she began to let out a blood-curdling scream. Was it a pain or was it a fear? My guess it was a mixture of both. And now, it is my turn. The first snip was actually quite liberating, but the pain soon had me almost passing out myself. But I soldiered on, kept snipping away the old skin and getting ready for the new. The sensation of the air hitting my exposed flesh was agonizing, and to make matters worse, I had forgotten to grab my sewing kit, so I slowly and painfully made my way to the kitchen where I had left it. But the feeling of slipping into my new skin was exhilarating, and after sewing myself up, I felt reborn. Just one last thing remained: the eyes. I passed out twice attempting to remove the first eye, but succeeded on the 4th attempt. I eagerly placed the first eye into my socket, and then removed my second eye and placed the second eye into place. The world became darkness, something I may have overlooked, but what can you do? What's done is done. I do wish that I could see myself now. How beautiful I looked. But whenever someone compliments my blue eyes, I know it was all worth it in the end.
We write to inform you of your son's unfortunate passing. Dear Mary, this letter holds some rather disheartening news. Your son has recently passed away inside our facility. It is not our doing. An unfortunate series of events occurred that led to this point. This could have turned out different if your son had controlled himself. For the first part of the day, he was sobbing uncontrollably for hours on end. A constant stream of tears rolled down his cheeks. This was distressing the others, so we put him back in his cell. Apparently, he did not like this and began acting out, throwing objects out the door and attacking staff members. We do not tolerate this behavior, so we put him in a straitjacket and gave him anesthetics. This was the only period of the day where he acted calm. When he woke, he once again began trying to attack us while roaring, "They're going to kill me. Save me, please." This was the last straw as he injured 2 staff members, so we locked him in solitary confinement. For that entire night, screams were heard in the cell, and no matter how hard one might try, the door wouldn't budge. The next morning, when the door unlocked, he was lying down on the ground dead, beaten to a pulp. Mary, this didn't need to happen if you paid us the full amount of the ransom. We are well overdue the money, and if it is not paid back with an extra 50%, we will do the same to your daughter. And if your dumbass son had been better behaved, we might have chosen a more painless execution.
Hunting ground. It was supposed to be the perfect getaway for me and my wife Deborah. We had both earned the break from the kids, and Deborah's parents were more than happy to take care of their beloved grandchildren for the weekend. I rented a cabin in the woods, and when we arrived, it was far more beautiful than when we had imagined. It stood against the backdrop of a scenic lake view. The ambience of the forest was calming, and the air was fresh, The interior of the cabin had a cozy feel to it, and its beauty matched that of the exterior. It felt very homely. On the wall above the fireplace was an odd painting depicting a mustached man dressed in 1800s attire with a rifle in his hands, standing with one foot on a very strange-looking animal. The animal had the shape of a human, yet its head was terribly elongated, and its emaciated body was covered by jet black skin. But the thing that stood out the most was the huge elk-like antlers protruding from its head. "Well, that's creepy," Deborah said as she gazed at the painting. She was right. It was creepy. Later that night, as I was brushing my teeth, I heard Deborah scream from the bedroom. I rushed to her, and when I saw her face, she was ghostly pale. "Something's outside. I saw it looking through the window," Deborah said, panicking. I looked outside the window and saw nothing. "It's probably just some animal," I said, trying to calm her down. To reassure her, I went outside to look around while she stayed inside. It was unusually quiet. The air was still, and the sounds one would expect to hear in the woods at night were absent. I was met by utter silence, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking in the dark forest watching me, and that feeling persisted as I searched around the cabin. My eyes darted the trees in search of movement as I made my way towards the lake. Once I was standing beside the lake, I caught a glimpse of something slightly hidden among a thick layer of foliage in the distance. It was a shed. I approached it slowly. My eyes still wandered around the surrounding forest in a paranoid gaze. The door to the shed was locked by a very old and rusty padlock. With one swift kick, the door opened. Inside was a table, and on the wall were antlers. A metal box sat on the table. When I opened it, there was a single letter inside that read, November 1892. "There are creatures on these grounds that do not belong to God. Beware the hunger, they will curse upon you. I couldn't save my daughter from the ravenous hunger that drove her to kill and feast on her own mother. The natives call them wendigos. I have hunted them for 10 years and killed 5 of them. But my hunger is too much now. My fight is almost over. After this is written, I am going to go into the woods and end my life. Take heed of my warning. Beware the hunger." I stared at the letter a moment longer, studying it curiously before putting it into my pocket. I decided to go check on Deborah. When I got back to the cabin, I noticed the door was open, and I was sure I had closed it on my way out. In fact, I was certain I did. I cautiously entered the cabin and called out to Deborah, but received no reply. I approached the bedroom and was surprised to see the door closed, and there was a weird crunching sound coming from the other side. "Deborah?" I called out. No reply. I opened the door and recoiled back with horror at the sight I was witnessing. Deborah was set on the bed, covered in blood, munching on her remaining fingers, and when she spotted me, she smiled wide through her blood-stained teeth.
The farming life. Unwanted puppies were a regular occurrence for John, a farmer from out Midwest. Because instead of getting his dog Misty spayed, like any other responsible pet owner, John simply took her pregnancies as they came and concluded that it was all part of farming life to deal with. He didn't have the time or money to be dealing with a litter full of yapping puppies, nor did working dog Misty have the time to rear them. So John, litter after litter, would dispose of them. It was just farming life after all. But since the birth of his daughter Rain, getting rid of the puppies had gotten harder. She would lay atop of the puppies at 3 years old, wailing that she didn't want them taken away. John would gently tell her to go see her mom and load each dog into an old grain sack. With his wife coaxing Rain into a game of hide and seek, John would then dispose of it down at the lake. It was just a farming life after all. Sure enough, one freezing cold winter, John awoke to the tiny yaps of puppies. As he turned on the light downstairs, he saw an enormous litter of 10 black and white dogs. He'd had his suspicions Misty had been pregnant, but worked her anyway. "You want hotcakes, hun?" Misty's had puppies again, by the way. "Yeah, I can see 'em. Has Rain seen 'em?" "No, she's still sleeping. Eat up and dump them before she wakes." Nodding, John went into the shed and shook out an empty grain sack. Bundling all the pups inside, he rested it by the door, leaving them to squeak helplessly for Misty. John gobbled up his breakfast, getting syrup all through his mustache and coat. "It's not wrong, is it?" his wife sighed, washing a plate. "Nah, darling, it's the farming life after all." Returning to the hall, John heaved the sack across his shoulder and walked out to the tractor. It was a heavy litter, 10 pups, and the weight was almost too much for him. He set it down by the tractor, knotted it, and then headed for the pond. He always threw it in with care that it would hit the deep first and sink the lives within it quickly. He watched the water ripple a while and snuggled deeper into his coat. John always took his time coming back, but as he returned, his wife appeared to be frantic, peeking under tables and chairs. "Where are you, sweetie?" She laughed nervously. "Come out. Hide and seek is over. Rain." Smiling to himself, John wandered back into the hall to check on Misty. She sat in the bundle of empty blankets, eyes sad. "Sorry, girl." John rubbed her ears. "It's just the farming life." His heart stood still as he glanced over to where the sack had been leaning. For on the ground, obviously torn away from a quick hide-and-seek opportunity, was Rain's butterfly hair clip.
Classified. Test subject number 144. Name, Victoria Maxwell. Age, 32. Occupation, prostitute. 2:23 a.m. Test subject arrived at the lab, restrained to the bed with handcuffs. She appears to be in good health. Subject is still sedated. 2:40 a.m. Subject is finally awake. She has begun screaming and is fiercely fighting against her restraints. Her face appears both confused and afraid. 2:53 a.m. Subject calmed down enough for me to explain the situation to her. I calmly told her about the aims of my research, my life's work. I told her of my intention to turn her into a plant. Subject then began to scream even louder than before. 3:21 a.m. The big pot has finally arrived. About bloody time, too. It is packed with the finest soil to make her flourish as she absorbs the nutrients. Her roots will grow deep, and they will grow strong. 3:38 a.m. Subject is ready for preparation. 3:47 a.m. Preparation is now beginning. Subject has been sedated. 4:11 a.m. Subject wasn't given enough drugs. Her eyes opened widely as her head and spinal cord were removed from her body. Surgery was a success. Spinal cord remains intact. Subject is suitable for planting. 4:56 a.m. Subject's spinal cord was placed deeply into the soil in the pot. I swear she winked at me as I packed the soil tightly around her head. Planting was a success. We'll return to check progress in 1 month. Subject will remain in a secure enclosure until it has bloomed. 1 month later. I have arrived to work, feeling both excited and anxious. I enter the subject's holding cell, and before my eyes lay a beautiful creature. One not of God's design, but of my own. Is it wise for a mortal man to think about entering into godhood? I do feel like a god. Subject has grown very tall, as I had expected. The spine has completely spread its roots through the soil. I think we might need a bigger pot. Her head is beginning to show signs of blooming as the petals are beginning to grow out from her eyes in an array of beautiful colors. Subject head has split itself into 3, 2 eyes and 1 nose. Subject is alert to my presence. One of the eyes hovers in front of me, attached to a long snake-like branch. Then the other eye darted to my position, followed by the nose, audibly sniffing the air around me. Subject appears distressed. Subject is flailing around wildly and emitting an awful, paralyzing screech. Subject has blocked the entrance. It appears the subject can now grow itself at will. I need help. Oh no, it's wrapping itself around me. Can someone fucking help me? No, please. I'm sorry, okay? It was for science. Please don't kill...
One more game. I just want to play one more game. A weary smile spread across the man's face as his young daughter handed him the dice. They've been playing Parcheesi for a couple hours now, and it was her favorite game. Okay, one more, and it's bedtime, he said with a stern but loving expression. They rolled the dice, moving their pieces across the board, racing to beat the other. Eventually, one last dice toss declared the girl the victor, yet again. She giggled as he picked her up and tickled her, forcing her to laugh so hard no noise came out of her. Soon after, her eyes grew heavy as her father carried her up the stairs and into bed. "I love you, Daddy," she tiredly called out. His heart swelled with joy and sadness as he processed her words. "I love you too, Pumpkin." He put the lights out and turned on the teddy bear nightlight and closed the door. After a few hours, he was sure she had drifted off to a deep slumber. He got up and made his way to the basement, locking the door behind him. He came into view of the young man chained up in the corner. His broken and bruised body cowered away. He tried to beg for him to stop, but the stitches in his lips wouldn't allow it. The despair was mostly visible in the puffy eyes and tear-stained cheeks. "Stop crying, you little bitch," he threatened. He examined his table, deciding what to use this time. He collected a needle and paralytics. He crouched down in front of the man, non-verbally begging him to let him go home. With a cold, inhuman gaze, he injected the paralyzing agent into the man, prepared to have his fun. He brought the knife up to the man's stomach, rubbing alcohol ready for later. "I just want to play one more game."
Couples that slay together. We were inseparable. We had been since we were toddlers. Our moms were best friends, meaning we saw each other a lot. And over the years, our bond only grew greater. Me and Eve were made for each other. We became glued to each other. Wherever I went, she was by my side. We were even in the same class together, much to our teacher's dismay. Neither of us had any friends. We preferred it that way too. All we needed was each other. We weren't like the other kids. Our shared desire in life was one simple thing: to have fun. But what me and Eve found fun, other kids, and especially grown-ups, found disturbing. I remember one time we were playing in her garden together, and the neighbor's dog, a chocolate-colored Labrador, was outside on the other side of the small wooden fence. It came over, sniffing the air and wagging its tail excitedly. Eve went over to the fence and stroked the dog's head. "Who's a good boy?" Eve said as the dog licked her face. Eve continued petting the dog for a while before turning to me with that familiar smirk on her lips. and that look in her perfect blue eyes that suggested to me that it was playtime. She continued to stroke the dog, who was happily wagging its tail with appreciation. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a Swiss Army knife and unfolded the blade, then held it out in front of the dog's face. The dog sniffed the tip of the blade curiously, and Eve pushed the knife deep into the dog's nostril. The dog began yelping as it made a wet sniffing sound. It retreated back and started walking around the garden in a panic before dropping to the ground and pawing at its mangled nose. I was on the floor laughing at this point, and soon enough, Eve was by my side laughing too, and we both watched the dog for a while. But our fun was interrupted when the neighbor rushed outside and panicked upon seeing her dog laying in a pool of blood. And when the old bitch threatened to call the police on us, I took it upon myself to stop this from happening. Nobody messes with Eve. As the neighbor began pulling out her phone, I snapped and grabbed the blood-stained blade from Eve's hand and plunged it into the woman's eye. She dropped to the ground, and Eve hopped over the fence and booted her hard in the face. "Give me the knife," Eve said. I gave her the knife, and then she began furiously stabbing the woman's chest repeatedly. For 5 minutes, she just kept stabbing as I watched, smiling. It was then and there that I knew I wanted to marry her someday. And by adulthood, Eve agreed to become my wife, and we both tied the knot in an unofficial ceremony. As they say, couples that slay together, stay together.